Thank you everyone for joining our webinar. We are kicking off a series of 3 webinars. This is the first of 3, specifically to do with the new marketplace of COVID-19 and with a real focus on the new home building market. I'm very grateful and also lucky to have 2 guests with us today. Excuse me. Both very experienced executives in the home building market. And so please welcome both Mark Richardson, the Executive General Manager of Sales and Marketing for Simonds Homes, and Anthony Staltari, who's the National General Manager of the MetInvest division of Metricon Homes. Thanks guys for joining me.
Thanks for having us, man.
Yeah, pleasure, Dan.
So just to kick things off, the structure of today's call, today's webinar, we're keeping it to about 40 minutes. After I sort of take you through in the first 5 to 10 minutes a bit about some of our recent web stats and also share with you some recent insights we've picked up from some consumer surveys, we're going to move into a Q&A where I will be putting a whole range of questions to Mark and Anthony, and these are questions that a lot of our participants on the call have submitted over the course of the last 10 days. So thank you very much for putting forward those questions, and we'll look to address the majority of them over the course of the next 40 minutes. There will be potentially an opportunity just at the very end of this call to ask some questions. We probably won't have more than about 5 minutes left, but if you do have questions during the course of the webinar, feel free to put those questions into the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer at least a couple of them at the back end of this call or the back end of the webinar. So to kick things off, firstly, I'm going to talk about 4 different insights that we've picked up over the last couple of months to do with our website, iBuildNew.com.au, and our web traffic. I'm going to talk a little bit about the search traffic, a bit about the engagement we've seen on the site. I'll also cover a bit about what we're seeing with listings that have 3D visuals and particularly virtual tours associated with them. And we'll also talk a little bit about first home buyer market and what we're seeing on that front. So firstly, in terms of our own web traffic, this is a chart that just shows really our total web sessions during the last four and a little bit months. So really from the start of this calendar year. We had seen a sort of moderate decline in traffic towards the end of February, and what you can then see is a much more significant decline in the last, particularly the last 2 weeks of March. But what we then saw from about the very last part of March and the early part of April, a very strong recovery. In fact, if you have a look at our last 2 weeks of web traffic, we're actually now above pre-COVID levels. So the marketplace, while it did, I suppose, retract and search traffic and the use of our platform had gone back quite a bit in the second half of March. It has recovered very strongly. The other thing that we've noticed is the amount of engagement we're finding on our website has grown exponentially over the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks in particular. Our engagement was already on the rise in the first couple of months of this year. And although we saw this decline in web traffic from the back end of February, what we saw in parallel with that was this really significant increase in engagement of those users of the site. And in particular, I'm referring to the 2 stats that we track pretty actively on the site, which are on this chart. Firstly, the average time on site, which is now above 7 minutes as an average, but also the average number of page views, which is sitting around 10. So we've seen quite a steady growth in the engagement of users during this period of COVID-19. The other thing that we've been studying is the listings that we have on our site that have a 3D visual attached to them. I'm specifically talking about listings of home designs or house and land packages where there's a display available and that display has a virtual tour. this is not necessarily a new insight, but it is one that's been reinforced quite significantly over the last sort of month or so. And what we're seeing is that the average for a listing of, say, a home design that does have a virtual tour attached to it, you're seeing through almost 4 times the average dwell time or the average duration of that user on the site. They are almost 3 times more likely to download a brochure on that product, and they're 1.6 heading towards 2 times more likely to make an inquiry. So needless to say, in the current market, COVID-19, where we're restricted, and people are less inclined to go to displays, and we've obviously had some centres in some parts of the country closed. It's been almost an imperative to have displays, virtual tours available for those virtual appointments to really make it an effective experience and give yourself the best chance of selling a home in the current environment. But I think now what it's also showing, it's pretty much imperative. If you've got a display, now's the time to get a virtual tour done on it if you don't have one already, and then get that listed on your own website, get it listed on iBuildNew and any other platform for that matter that you may be listing on. The final web stat I was just going to quickly touch on is one of the insights we've picked up is around the first home buyer segment. Historically, we've tracked in terms of the percentage of our inquiry, that is first home buyer, is tracked historically at about 30%. Now there's many stats, and this varies by state around the country, but the first home buyer market by and large sits at around 20% of the market. So as a platform, we've always been a little bit overweight towards first home buyer. And as I said, around 30% of our inquiry is historically first home buyer. What you can see on this chart is since January this year, that has been on the rise. And particularly over the last couple of weeks, that's become quite a significant difference. If you look at the green bar, the green line versus the blue line, we're now averaging about 45% of our inquiries now first home buyer. So it's by far and away the most significant sector in the market. Is also probably the most active sector we believe in the market with the strongest intent, and that is somewhat driven by data and also somewhat driven by our phone consultants anecdotally based off the conversations they're having with buyers. The other thing that we've done over the last couple of weeks is we've been running a consumer survey. We have around 600 respondents to that survey now. And today we're just going to quickly share just 3 insights. It's probably 3 of about 10 insights. In our next webinar, we'll share the other 7 insights we've picked up from this survey. It's pretty hot off the press. So the first insight is to do with buyer intent. And the question we were specifically asking consumers was, has COVID-19 impacted your timeline to build? I think there's a few things that come out of this. Firstly, there's only 4% of people that are saying they will no longer build as a result of COVID-19. So I think that's interesting in itself. It's a very small number that have now basically stopped any plans they may have otherwise had to build. There's roughly 1/4 of people that have deferred their plans from building this year, but certainly saying they still have intent to build. And there's 3/4 of people that it basically hasn't impacted them at all, or it's impacted them in a very minimal way. So to me, and the way we're interpreting that result is there is still the majority of buyers that were pre-COVID considering to build a new home are still have that level of intent and still have those same plans, with the exception of a real minority. The second insight relates to what's really the most important selection criteria for people now under the current COVID-19 situation. Interestingly, reputation. Sorry, I've jumped ahead one. Sorry, just coming back. It's the most important concern that people have at the moment. And look, more than half of the respondents are concerned about either employment or they're concerned about finances. And obviously those two things go hand in hand. Roughly a quarter of people have also got concerns around the uncertainty of the real estate market generally. So I think one thing that we would take out of this is probably the growing need, and a very important thing to do at the moment is to be addressing wherever you can as a sales and marketing organisation, to be trying to address employment and finance concerns of buyers, particularly in the current market. Coming back now just to the third insight here, which is to do with what's the more important decision-making criteria for people at the moment under the current COVID situation. And as I was about to come to before, it is reputation. Reputation is still the most single significant decision-making criteria that people have. That has historically been the case, and nothing has changed. And I think that's an important takeaway in itself. The second one, which is somewhat related to reputation, is the quality of inclusions. And that's a very clear second key decision-making criteria for people. And probably the other thing to call out is about 20% of people are saying that it's important to either have certainty around price, as in fixed price, or to be able to have certainty around and some flexibility around deposit taking in contracts. So there's a couple of things to take out of that one. And lastly, we also asked people around the likelihood of them attending or visiting a display home. I think there's a couple of things to take out of this. I think you can clearly see that the market understands there is a need for a private appointment. I think the industry's done an amazing job in both from the new home sector, but also the general real estate market, to educate buyers that that's an imperative. But the other thing is that over 1/3 would only visit a display in the final stages. Now, whether that's a new trend or something that we may see persist on a longer term basis, yet to be seen. But I think that's something to also take into consideration. So they were probably just a few of the insights I wanted to share. I'm now going to jump to our first of 8 questions. And Anthony, if you don't mind addressing this to kick off, address this first question before we jump to you, Mark. The first question is, what sort of research trends are you seeing from buyers within your respective businesses? So in the case of Metricon.
Sure. Well, thanks, Dan. Look, I think traditionally buyers source their research by visiting a display village and going from builder to builder. But what we're seeing as a bit of a trend is buyers educating themselves more online and coming to the display village with maybe a short list of builders. We're even seeing, spreadsheets with comparisons and all sorts of tools that they're using to make their choice before they come in. Now, it makes it much easier for us as a builder to engage with those people, but probably what it has done is extended the sales cycle a little, because they're probably doing a little bit more research at home before they come to the village. So interested to hear your thoughts, Mark.
Yeah, mate. Look, not too dissimilar. I probably do take one slightly slanted view on that, though, that I don't think it's changed the gestation period of how long they're in the market for. I think what's been highlighted is we're now going to capture them a lot earlier than what we thought, due to the digital push that a lot of businesses have driven. They're actually speaking to people earlier on in the process than previous. So, previously people were doing online research without engaging a builder and then going out to the displays, 1 or 2 times, and then coming back and actually engaging with a rep, which is when we first identify them, but they're already well into the process. Whereas now, because they don't have the luxury of going out and doing that, we might see that it's a longer conversation with them, but I think we're just picking them up earlier. So, but definitely that whole the trend is all now moving to everything being online, and we're seeing that our digital inquiry has gone through the roof. since all this happened. It echoes the stats that you put up there before, Daniel, in terms of the searches on iBuildNew. So that's I think the biggest thing that we've seen from our buyers. Very much also wanting to be. I think the important part here is that the buyers want to see that speed to service, that responsiveness, as opposed to dwell times in display homes and coming back to us when they're ready. They want to know the answers now.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and it very much ties in, I suppose, to some of those stats we saw a little bit earlier just on our own platform, and I'm sure that you guys are probably seeing similar things on your own websites. Moving straight along to the second question, and Mark, if you don't mind kicking off with this one, is there any segments of the market you're seeing more inquiry and intent from than others? And is there kind of any variation between different states across the country?
Yeah, so sorry to any developers who are on this call, but we're seeing a lot of people coming to us with land already. So we've seen the shift from packages to now more around, I've got a block and how quickly can you get me to site? So again, that whole velocity is a big play there, where people have committed to land in the past and were thinking that they had plenty of time to see what the market was going to do and ride the upswing that we were seeing in the tail of last year, and in no great rush to make a decision to do something. And now that segment has been brought into the market with that whole, what can I do and how quickly can you do it for me? The other part as well, so with that, time's a pretty big motivator for those people. The other thing we've seen, obviously the first home buyer market, which again matches the graph that you put there, and I don't think that varies at all geographically. I think that's everywhere. We've seen through our Google Analytics that first home buyer search words have skyrocketed. So there's people at home, I guess using the time to sitting in a cooped up environment thinking, what am I living in and how could I be doing this better, and are now looking to change their living lifestyle. So, and the other weird one that I don't think we've seen yet, but possibly will see, will be emerging markets that we didn't previously see. And what I mean by that is you've had buyers out there who, look at it this way, the vast majority of job losses that we've seen have been in retail and hospitality, and the majority of those in casual work. Now, traditionally, they're not the people who are buying $500,000 plus home and land packages. So I don't think they've been a massive impact on our segment, and I say ours as an industry. But I think there'll be more people who are now earning more money than they ever have. So, transport and logistics, PPE or medical manufacturing or suppliers that now all of a sudden are making a heck of a lot more money than they were before, and might be new emerging markets that, these people who haven't previously been able to buy are now able to buy. And I think that's something to be, in our industry, to be positive about and look for different marketplaces. Ant, do you think anything differently to that, mate?
No, look, I think that emerging market is interesting, and it rings true probably to where we are economically. I think for us, first home buyers has been certainly a very strong growth sector, and it emulates your figures, Dan. But we're also seeing some fairly strong investor inquiry, both locally and offshore. And I think the offshore buyers were ultimately looking for that currency play when the dollar dropped. And more importantly, on a local front, they were looking for a bargain, because many of us had offers in the market, as with the land development partners. But from a geographical point of view, certainly Vic is the standout for us, probably closely followed by New South Wales. And that probably emulates the market pre-COVID. Things were on the up in both those states. So that's sort of the trend that we're seeing.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And look, the topic of sort of emerging markets, I think, is an interesting one, or sort of sub-segments. And one of the things that we've seen within iBuildNew, and it's a relatively small market in the scheme of things, but if you think about people that are living abroad, Australians that are living abroad at the moment, this drive, given what's happened with the pandemic, is now to repatriate sooner than what they would have otherwise. So we are anecdotally picking up quite a few people, particularly Australians living in the UK and the US, where you know the pandemic has probably been obviously far more extreme than what we've seen in our country, fortunately. A lot of those expats are now looking to repatriate. So it's another kind of emerging market, I think, that has always been there, but it's probably being brought forward. Just jumping to our third question, and maybe if we just come back to you, Anthony, to answer this to start with. The question being, with greater uncertainty in jobs, income, finances, etc., how are you trying to mitigate some of this uncertainty that buyers have?
Yeah, look, I think it's really important, you know, going into COVID to give people surety that if they were going to purchase during these uncertain times, that, you know, we have the capacity to process their job, continue building. We've been very fortunate in the home building industry to still be able to operate on site. But for us, we put a little bit of a hardship policy together where we had a couple of little programs designed around if someone did choose to go ahead and lost their job, well, we'll put the job on hold. We wouldn't give them any price disadvantage, or if they chose to cancel, we refund their deposit. We also extended our price hold period as well, just to give them further comfort. And then we had a bit of a price drop guarantee, which, you know, is obviously the concern for a lot of people is, you know, what if prices drop, I'll be disadvantaged. So we had a policy in place that said, you know, if that did happen, we'd honour any pricing disadvantage that you may encounter. So that was some of the things that we put in play, and obviously drove, you know, our brand strength, and you know, we've been around for a while, and we've been through these other uncertain times. I think the thing that we try to drive into our internal people is how resilient Australia has been post these types of events. And the stats say that, you know, as a country, we rebound very strongly.
Thanks, Anthony. What about yourself, Mark?
Yeah, again, it seems like the Team Red and Team Blue are pretty well aligned. So we've gone out with similar messaging to our marketplace with regard to helping customers who, you know, with regard to lower deposits or extended price holds. So, you know, and that's been well received by the sales team as well as the customers out there as well. The other thing, as I said before, that we found as being a real driver is that whole speed. So customers who we haven't seen any financial hiccups at the moment, you know, in valuations or anything. And speaking with developers, we haven't seen anything yet either, and hopefully we don't. But given there is that uncertainty, customers know what they know today. So they're in a position where they're saying, well, how quickly can I get a contract? How quickly can I get a gallery appointment? Or how quickly can I get to site? And how quickly can you build? That seems to be you know, part of the driving factors, and that helps mitigate their risk. And commercially it helps mitigate ours as well, to be fair. So, you know, that's been the real side of it, that whole speed to service. I think it's also for all the new customers coming in and for all the sales reps who are on here listening. I think your partnership with your finance broker, if you've got one, is going to be imperative in this coming market. And having there's finance brokers who are optimistic in some of the deals that they put through, and those who are too cautious. I think you've got to find that balance in this current environment. You don't want to be taking, you know, tomorrow's cancellation in a deposit today. But at the same time, it's all about pre-qualifying early and then setting an expectation with the customer to make sure you've got, you know, this is what might happen, and these are the things that, you know, really outlining the must-haves and the wants in their home. Because if something does change, if the goalposts do move, rather than have a job disappear out of your bins and out of your commission statement, you want to have that expectation set up front of, okay, we've hit this situation that we talked about at the start of this whole process. Now we need to look at plan B. So I think that whole setting the right expectation, and that really being the, rather than trying to do the catch and kill that we had in the rising market, we now got to make sure that we're really coaching and nurturing our customers through the buying process.
Terrific, thanks, Mark. We might just stay with you, Mark, and jump straight to question 4. Post COVID-19, are you anticipating any changes in the way buyers may use display villages to find the right home, or indeed changes builders may actually make themselves in the way with their displays and their display strategies?
Yeah, look, I think you'll see more of a pivot in marketing spend to virtual displays. And what I mean by that is, all the stuff you put on before with regard to video walkthroughs or 3D walkthroughs of homes. They're obviously going to play more of a part. I think you'll see internal sales teams will be bolstered across the industry. With essentially everyone at the moment operating as an internal sales rep, relying on digital leads. But I think you'll see the emergence of the internal reps trying to capture buyers a lot earlier in that sales process, and then almost walking them hand in hand through the display homes, as opposed to letting them just turn up at their free will. So you'll see a lot more inspections that way. I think the other thing as well, and a different way to interpret your question here, is around how builders will display their homes too. I think there's a lot of people sitting at home right now and finding out all the things in their home that don't work, and it is motivating them to look for what else is out there. The whole work from home thing. I think this is, COVID's going to change a lot of industries and businesses. There'll be more working from home situations for a lot of office workers. So having that, the zone studies and, sitting at a dining table like I am now with a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old locked away at the front of the house so I can have this seminar, doesn't cut it. So I think you'll see displays, even the way that the homes are actually displayed. I think turning a 4th bedroom to be a study on display would be a big no-no in the past, because you want to highlight 4 bedrooms, but it might change that. You need to show that there's an extra space there for studying or home office. So I think there's a few things that will happen. But yeah, I think from a sales perspective though, it's going to be more about capturing that lead earlier, and the display village will be the end of the decision making. So for the reps sitting in displays, that whole nurturing of your customers is going to be important, because if you're not doing it, the internal rep or your competitor is going to be doing it, and you're just going to get what's left over.
Right, and yourself, Anthony?
Yeah, look, I don't think there's going to be any great change in the immediate future. I think display homes still have a very active part in the decision-making process. Purchasing a home is the single biggest investment a person makes, so they want to touch it and feel it. And more importantly, they want to engage with a real person who can give them some insight into the things they can and can't do. I certainly agree with the notion that, builders will move more to a digital environment, and this, time has more importantly shown that you need those digital assets to drive inquiry. So I think that area will grow, but I still think they've got a really integral part in the play of a builder. And interestingly, since we've seen restrictions ease in certain states, those numbers have jumped, traffic numbers have jumped right up.
Yeah, don't disagree with that, Anth. I think you cannot replace the displays. I think it's more just about when we'll see the buyers. So the display reps are going to see the buyers later in the process than the other. It's not like buying a T-shirt online. My wife's a maniac in that. The postman almost knows his name now with all the deliveries and stuff happening here. You are buying a home, so you do need to go through it and feel it and have it be tangible. So there's definitely a place for them. I'm just more focusing on again, talking to the reps that are on here, competitors and my own guys, if they're on here as well. I think that whole way that you engage with the customer is going to be a lot more important now, because they're going to be a lot more educated online than they will previously when they walked into the displays as that deer in the headlights.
Good. Thanks, gents. And let's skip right along to question 5, which is, and there is a lot of doom and gloom at the moment. There's no doubt about that in terms of COVID-19, whether you're talking about the local market or offshore. When unemployment is being talked about in double-digit figures, that there's always doom and gloom. But are there any sort of green shoots that are perhaps starting to emerge? If we could just come back to you, Mark, on this one.
Yep. So your key metrics are always your web traffic. Well, normally it's walk-in traffic, but at the moment it's web traffic or leads. Our web traffic is growing incrementally week on week. We're in week 8 of this lockdown situation. That's grown week on week. Our volume of leads has grown week on week. And similarly, our sales have grown week on week. So I talked to my own sales team about this. I look at it as 3 phases. There's the hysteria as this all happened. There's the re-establishment of a new norm, which is what I think we're in now. And then there's the rebirth, which will be hopefully not too far away. So just prior to coming onto this Zoom meeting, I got an email from HIA confirming that Victorian display homes are now in line with all the other states in Australia and now open, obviously under restricted capacity with the only 10 people per display and must take names and numbers and what have you, but it's no longer strictly by appointment. So that's some good news. And again, just to reiterate what Anthony said before, we're seeing more people out and about. So I think the lightening of the restrictions pending everyone's health and everything stays good and we don't see a resurgence in infections, that it'll be a watch and wait. And as we talked earlier about the Google search terms in first home buyers skyrocketing, the part of that I think is being forced to stay at home. And again, I'm a silver linings kind of guy, right? So I'm trying to find what opportunities or things might be out there. There are first home buyers, the millennials, who generally, we're an Uber Eats generation. We're a go out and dine, we're a go out and I want this, I'll buy it now generation. That discretionary spending has been forced to stop. So people who are fortunate enough to still be in jobs and working from home are actually saving more money over the last 8 weeks than they ever have. So again, is that going to bring out more people into the market in that first home buyer space? I hope so. So I think it's too early to call green shoots or starting to emerge, but if you just watch the trends are positive. And yeah, it'll be a bit of a watch and wait though.
And yourself, Anthony, on the Metricon front?
Yeah, look, I've got to say we surprisingly haven't seen a great deal of doom and gloom. Sales have actually still been relatively strong through this period. And we're a little bit amazed by it. And we can't really put our finger on why, other than there was a bit of demand coming into COVID. And I think people who have a job have formed the view that they're quite fortunate and have decided to act now and take advantage of the offers that are in market. I think probably the change will be more from a builder perspective in terms of how we see the market. I know we've won deals based on strength of brand, time in market, all those things that we sometimes take for granted. So I know discussions we've had internally is to probably change the thinking to the reasons why you should build with a Metricon, as opposed to price point and offer. So I think there'll be a slight shift in that thinking.
Interesting. Thanks, Anthony. And I think, Mark, it was a good way to talk about the current market in this these three stages we're sort of working through, and very much agree we're in that second phase, and maybe that third phase is not very far away. And also thanks for that little update, the HIA one, in terms of the Victorian display villages. We just had a question come in actually on the webinar on that exact point, so you've already answered that one. Jumping through to the sixth question.
It's your own general manager to find out though.
Has there been, and maybe Anthony, if you could kick off on this one, but has there been much talk of, there's already been a fair bit of talk around government stimulus. What sort of measures would you see buyers having the most benefit from, and the industry having most benefit from at the moment? You there, Anthony?
You're on mute, mate.
Wish list, I think some further stimulus for the first home buyer market. I mean, that traditionally is the litmus of the industry. So, if we can continue to drive that and bring people forward who potentially aren't in a position to purchase a home now. That would be ideal. From a investment perspective, is the world I live in most of my working day. Certainly a relaxation on the stamp duty levy and FIRB costs will improve that. That has been a major barrier for us, and we've lost lots of business to the US and UK and other countries who have far more attractive incentives. But probably a more holistic view is maybe a relaxation around, you know, the planning red tape and the costs involved for our development partners and the pain they have to go through, which is then passed on us as a builder, and the cost and time impulse it has to us. You know, if we could achieve some reforms in that space, that would be great.
Yeah, I think what Anthony's saying there is there's no silver bullet, right? I think it's going to be a combination of a few different things that are going to work for us, right, Anth?
Yeah, definitely. I think the good thing about this is it's united the industry. Everyone's working together for the betterment of it. I mean, construction, both residential and commercial, is a massive employer. You know, it's got a significant job multiplication factor. So it's a really important industry, and we all have to work together in these times.
Yeah, and we've even seen, you know, the unions working with government for the first time in a long time. So that, I think, you know, red and blue teams are on a Zoom call together. So, but no, I think you're right in everything you said there. The biggest thing that we need is a first home buyer stimulus that it's targeted towards construction as opposed to just residential. I don't think that if it's just a first home buyer bonus to any buyer, that won't have too much of an impact for us, everyone on this call. So to see something that, you know, maybe first home buyers for established at one tier and then for it to build at another tier, given that, you know, nearly 10% of the economy is employed through the construction industry. I think the government are smart enough to realise that, and they'll want to see construction, knowing that they can't lean on tourism to lead us out of this economic void that we're probably going to go into. They're going to lean on construction to do that. So, you know, tourism, education are the two big ones, and they rely on people travelling. So that's going to be difficult to work on. So hopefully the lion's share comes to our industry, whether it's in commercial, civil, and also residential, that I think we'll see a benefit. So again, for the reps on the line, I think if you start segmenting your databases now, looking for those first home buyers, get them ready, because if something comes, it's going to be first to the party, and the one who's the information king that's really going to benefit from this.
Couldn't agree more with much of that, guys. And hopefully, I think you're right, Mark, in terms of the government's smart enough to know how critical the construction sector is to the entire economy. And hopefully, whatever stimulus does come forward, both at state and federal government levels, it does get its way, you know, back into the new construction sector and benefit people that are going to build new more so than others buying established. Jumping to the second last question very quickly, and Mark, if you don't mind kicking off on this one, if general property prices were to fall by 10 to 15%, as some analysts and some reports are indicating for the Australian property outlook, what impact may this have on the new build market?
Yeah, so again, depends what day you read in the newspaper and who's written the article as to what the market's going to do out of all this. Are we going to slingshot out of this and the market's going to rebound, or is there going to be these falls? I wish I had a crystal ball. Look, I think if there is a fall, obviously we're in construction, so our costs to an extent are fixed. The fall, if anything, is going to happen in the land side of it, because you've got to have that parity still between buying established and building, and it's going to be the land guys, unfortunately, I think, are going to wear the hit. Obviously the construction will too, but not to the same extent as I think the land guys will see. The other one, and Anth, I'll leave you to talk to it about, is probably investor activity. But I guess from our retail space, your first home buyers are going to be brought into the market again, just to not to harp on it like I've got shares in first home buyer buyers or something, but you know, people who previously were saving a long time to get a deposit if property prices fall by 10 to 15%, you've just wiped a couple of years off their whole savings program. You've brought them forward to come into the market. So, and then add, the suspected government stimuluses that will probably happen. I think that'll help rebound that 10 to 15% fall if it does happen pretty quickly. But I'm not an economist, so I'm just saying. Yeah, just reading tea leaves.
And your thoughts, Anthony?
Yeah, look, I tend to agree. I'm pretty optimistic about the market. I think one thing that we need to take into consideration is that a market fall is based on people being in distressed positions. And so, or less buyers coming into the market. The data we've seen today, and anecdotally that the two biggest builders in Australia have spoken about, is data suggests we've got strong sales inquiry. In terms of distressed assets, you can go to your bank and negotiate a deal for 6 months and it's government guaranteed. So there's going to be less people having to sell their property. So my gut says we're going to come out of this in a pretty positive manner. I think, the market, and I've spoken about this a couple of times, pre-COVID was starting to improve. So I'm thinking that pent-up demand's going to be still there. Talking to a lot of the established real estate guys, they're short on listings at the moment. And what they do have is selling pretty quickly. So I don't know, my gut says that we're going to come out of this okay.
Yeah. Thanks, guys, for those thoughts. Final question, and we'll try and wrap it up in the next couple of minutes. This is a question that we took as part of the registration process from participants, not necessarily a sort of COVID-19 type question, but one that we thought was just worth teasing out anyway. Are there any ethical obligations builders have when advertising the price of their homes, and what role can iBuildNew play in creating transparency? Do you want to maybe comment first, Anthony?
Yeah, look, I suppose there's already fairly strict guidelines on, pricing with, in the Australian consumer law and all sorts of obligations in terms of bait advertising, etc. I don't think one size fits all in terms of how builders market. I think, the first home buyer market, for instance, you typically advertise more around deposit and entry level type incentives. The upgrade market, it is more price pointed and upgrades, and the luxury, it's more about aspirational. So look, I think builders all in all do a really good job at being authentic. I can't speak for iBuildNew, but as a active participant on your platform, I think it's fairly clear what pricing is with the product.
Yeah, I'll comment just in a moment myself. Perhaps Mark, if you just want to share your thoughts first.
Yeah, look, I think it's a difficult one because to assume that all builders are equal in terms of, and I don't mean that in an arrogance way that one builder is better than the other. I mean in terms of the segments that they're trying to target. Is wrong. So you can also assume that all customers want the exact same thing, because that's why different builders target different segments of the market. So to therefore have a level playing field in terms of inclusions and advertised prices, because that's, to be fair, that's what fluctuates the prices. It'll be the level inclusions where some include flooring and others don't, and so on and so forth. Who are we to assume as a builder that every buyer wants these inclusions? So each builder takes a stab at what they think is best based on their position in the market and the segment they're trying to target. So I think it comes down to then the builder being able to justify that position and qualify or disqualify their buyers and work that out. And iBuildNew obviously play a part in that, because you're essentially compare the market, if you like, for builders to come to try and find which builder is best suited to their situation. So you guys are almost playing a virtual display village before they come out to display work.
Yeah, look, and I'm sure most people on the webinar are aware, we do a couple of things on this front. First and foremost, we are providing to consumers the ability to compare, and there's some online functions that they can use to, if they're getting deep into sort of price analysis. But it is a difficult area, and it's one of the things that our phone consultants do, that we support buyers in terms of giving them just an independent source that they can talk to. And we do use our phone consultants that are all from the industry to educate people about the whole buying process, but also in particular, the differences in pricing, particularly when you're talking base price A versus base price B. So we do a couple of things on that front. I'm actually going to leave it there. We are now just past the 45 minutes that we intended. We have got a couple of questions that have come in. We've definitely addressed one. I'm not going to try and address the second one, just given the time. I did want to say a very special thanks to Mark and Anthony for joining on our first webinar, our first of three. Thanks, guys, very much. Really appreciate your participation and some of the insights you shared there. I'm sure many people on the call have benefited from that. For those that might be interested in joining our second webinar, we have a second one scheduled for Wednesday, the 10th of June at 2 p.m, same time. I can announce that we'll have the CEO of Burbank joining us, Jared Sanfilippo, and also the General Manager of McDonald Jones Homes, Steve Hearn. So very much looking forward to our second webinar, and hopefully sharing from an iBuildNew perspective, sharing some more up-to-date web stats, and also some other insights we've picked up from the recent consumer survey that we ran. So thank you everyone for joining our webinar. Look out for the invitation for our
Daniel,
in a couple of weeks' time.
Daniel, can I just give a quick shout out to all the sales reps who are on the line here? So competitors, my guys, land agents, all those people. You've all been out, the majority of your businesses have engaged work from home for all the offices. But you guys have all been out sitting in displays or sitting in land huts doing what you do. And I think just a big thank you from all the industry that you've allowed it to continue to move forwards, obviously for your own incomes as well, but from an industry perspective, and that then flows into the economy. I just wanted to say a big thank you for doing that and operating under these trying conditions and doing it all with the appropriate distancing and rules that you've been doing. But well done, and thank you.
Well said, Mark, and good note to finish on. Thank you very much. Bye all.
Good stuff. See you later, guys.